Data from the Refugee Council found the number of asylum seekers being held in hotels has tripled to more than 26,000. As I mentioned, that costs around about £3 million a day. Figures show asylum seekers in temporary hotel accommodation at the end of 2021 was up from 9,400 at the start of the year. Steve Valdez-Simmons is Refugee and Migrants' Rights Director at Amnesty International. Afternoon to you, Stephen. No matter where anybody sits on this story, these numbers have to be unacceptable.
I completely agree with that. They're obviously unacceptable for the people who are stuck in hotels, often completely inappropriate accommodation for very long periods of time, including families with children. They're also completely unacceptable from any perspective of anyone about our asylum system. Whatever your views about it, it does nobody any good to be in this position.
Yeah.
But of course, that demands that we ask ourselves, frankly, why are we in this position? And if you seriously look at that question, there is no escaping the fact that under the present Home Secretary, now 3 years in office, the backlog in asylum claims has gone up month after month after month, consistently throughout her term. It has more than trebled during her 3 years. It is probably well in excess of 75,000 cases which have been waiting for more than 6 months for a decision. I say probably only because we have to wait for the next round of official figures to know precisely where we are now. But on any calculation of where we were back in March, those figures are likely to be well in excess of 75,000. When she started as Home Secretary, the backlog was somewhere around 15 to 20,000. Already very high, but nothing like what has happened. And then she must look at the policies she's introduced. She has deliberately put on hold the cases of thousands of people, refusing to admit them into her system on the basis that she said she would persuade European countries on the whole to receive thousands of people into their asylum systems, even though those countries largely have many more people already in their systems than does this country. It was never going to happen. So if she created this backlog.
So if you, I mean, we've had more asylum seekers, of course, in previous years, Steve, but something has gone wrong here because clearly the government want to try, I assume, they want to try and showcase a policy of some kind. We're onto this, we're dealing with it, and their way of doing this is to, it seems to me, I think you've just touched it, not process some of this and just keep people stuffed into hotels. So, and then of course there's the Rwanda thing, which doesn't seem to be going very far at the moment. But they've almost just to try to, I mean, to say they've ignored it might overstate it, but it feels a bit like that.
Well, I think it is that, really. Somehow it seems the Home Secretary has got it into her head that by refusing to simply get on and deal with the responsibilities that this country receives, somehow that will make those responsibilities go away.
So what is she supposed to do, though? Because I'm always stuck on this one. I know other countries take more. We do have. Should the government just stand up and say, look, you might not like this, and they're talking to their core Tory supporters, but this country has a policy for taking in some asylum seekers. Would that be the way they should start this? Because at the moment they're trying to pretend they don't when they clearly do, and that is confusing everything. Individuals shouldn't be stuck in hotels, if for no other... I mean, it's costing an awful lot of money for the taxpayer, but as you say, it's not the right way to try and process this. Do the government just need to be honest, or do they say we don't have any asylum policy at all, which is why some think they're trying to do with the Rwanda policy?
Well, they certainly have to be honest, I think with themselves, first of all, but obviously with the rest of us too. And again, whatever your wider policies, it simply can't be any good to say that when someone has arrived and they've made their asylum claim, you're simply going to avoid that fact and not deal with it. Because if you do that, then precisely this happens. You have somebody here, they're still here.
So what should they be doing then, Steve? What would be the answer to this?
Process people's claims. Process people's claims. accept responsibility for the limited number of people still. You're right, the numbers have gone up over recent months since the back end of last year, but for most of the time they didn't go up either. So deal with the claims that you've got. Decide who gets to stay, allow them to get on with their lives so the state doesn't have to keep supporting them. Identify the people who don't have any entitlement to asylum and deal with that, which of course means that it can be expensive, but going through the process of seeking to return people. But if you just put a stop on the whole thing and say, well, we're just not going to decide cases, then all you're doing is making an enormous amount of work.
No, I agree with that. Yeah, they're camouflaging or trying to hide something or do something so that they don't have, perhaps for them, Priti Patel in particular, so they don't have to deliver unpalatable statistics to their supporters, which might be, look, we've processed 20,000 people here, and that might not play well to one particular gallery. But what should the answer be then? If you were advising Priti Patel, what would it be, Steve?
I think be straightforward. This country receives a certain number of asylum claims. It has no particular control over that, just like other countries. But it doesn't receive a great deal partly because it's so far away from places from which people flee. So the numbers are relatively small. They're not insignificant. I'm not disguising that. But just get on and deal with the claims. Identify the people, first and foremost, who have rights to stay, allow them to stay, let them get on with their lives. Apart from anything else, many of the refugees who will ultimately be permitted to stay because they are entitled to that, they are essentially living in limbo at the moment. Their mental and physical welfare is being utterly destroyed. Their capacity to get on with their lives when finally they're permitted to is being destroyed. That isn't going to be good for anybody either. So we are just building more and more capacity, work, costs.
So this is an argument some might see your argument, Steve, as a reason to kind of try and cut this off at the first pass, really, and have no people coming across the channel or any other form, for that matter.
I think the answer to that simply is it can't be done. I mean, obviously, my position from Amnesty International is that we as a nation have an obligation, a legal one. We signed up to it, as did most of the rest of the world, to receive people seeking asylum. And we're supposed to do that. And certainly my perspective is that we should do that. But trying not to do it, if that's what your view is, just not wanting this, I'm afraid isn't going to make this go away. It's not going to stop people making journeys. What will happen is that more people will seek to find safety with family, friends, etc. here in secret. They'll not come forward to the authorities, and we'll just have larger and larger populations that the Home Office will then have to expend even more money and effort trying to identify, and when they've come forward, then have to process claims. So let's just cut out all of that, take our responsibilities, and deal with them as effectively, efficiently, and fairly as possible.
All right, Steve, thank you. Steve Valdez-Simmons, Refugee and Migrants Rights Director over there at Amnesty International. You may disagree with some of what he said, but he's right on one thing in identifying the woeful response from the Home Office, which has been, I mean, at best bonkers and at worst absolutely criminal for a whole variety of reasons. There's no way anybody would look at this. I mean, I think this is pretty bizarre. Saying that if you start to process people, then it looks as if we are being too welcoming, because many of those people, 80%, whatever it is, will get the green light and they'll stay. If you keep people in hotels, then we might sort of tend to not completely forget about individuals, but the overarching story, unless it comes up on programmes like this, will mean that we're not visibly seeing people out and about in the workplace in any increased numbers. There could be some of that, but they are, of course, very visibly stuffed in many, many hotels to the tune of 26,000, so that doesn't really work. But what is the answer then to this? He says, and he's right on this, you can say, well, have no immigration, but how would you stop people coming over the channel? We still can't. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk TV. We're live from the Talk Radio studios.